processes that are used in terms of passing that knowledge on, including protocols and diverse practices, as we saw this morning, the notion of holding your hands 4 times, doing the dip before that is passed on. And finally, that for all the knowledge we have, no matter which one of us, whether you're a child or whether you're an elder, there are certain responsibilities we have about the knowledge we have. And that we must be constantly mindful of the kind of responsibility that requires in terms of our continuing to maintain and transmit cultures in our communities, to maintain the knowledge that will keep our food, our health medicines, our science, and so on moving throughout our culture. As well as there's important knowing about the protection issues, that we are indeed all responsible for that. Irene Diaz was a wonderful friend of mine, and her work with the United Nations Working Group on Indigenous Populations for a couple of decades was very important. And one of the things she says, and it is that displacing systemic discrimination against Indigenous peoples created and legitimized by the cognitive frameworks of imperialism and colonialism remains the single most crucial cultural challenge facing humanity. Meeting this responsibility is not just the problem for the colonized and the oppressed, but rather the defining challenge for all peoples. It is the path to a shared and sustainable future for all peoples. And so it's really important when I look out at an audience such as this, both of Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples, both young and old, that we become aware that how we are all interconnected and how we are all not only interconnected but dependent upon each other. And so that dependence on each other is important about recognizing how we have a shared and sustainable future together, and that by understanding the nature of the importance of keeping Indigenous languages, Indigenous cultures, Indigenous communities alive and well and sustaining, that we will all then be able to benefit by having that knowledge be sustained and maintained in those communities and for the world as a whole. In 1993, when I was still working as an education director at the Oilodec First Nation Mi'kmaq School, I was asked, and my husband and some of his colleagues also, to help develop a research project that would identify what it was Indigenous knowledge, and also what would be the ways in which one might develop some principles and guidelines for the protection of that. That this had been constantly raised at the UN level, and so finding some funds to get this work done, she invited us then to begin that work. And with that work and the culmination of that, then became what is called the Principles and Guidelines for the Protection of Indigenous Heritage. This can be found online. If you wanted to go to the Native Law Center, for example, at the University of Saskatchewan, you'll find both the Principles and Guidelines for the Protection of Indigenous Heritage, as well as the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. But among the things that was noted in this, and that there is in the Principles and Guidelines, there are 11 principles that are put forward, and about 55 guidelines for how to implement those at institutions and as individuals, as researchers, as well as by institutions and agencies. And in there, we note that the effective protection of the heritage of Indigenous peoples of the world benefits all humanity. Its diversity is essential to the adaptability, sustainability, and the creativity of human species as a whole. To be effective, however, the protection of Indigenous peoples' heritage should be based broadly on the principle of self-determination, which includes the right of Indigenous peoples to maintain and develop their own cultures and knowledge systems and forms of social organization. And so we, by holding on to our communities and our own social organization, our language and our cultures, we are holding on to this knowledge and that this is a right we have. In Canada, that right is also put forward in our Constitution in Section 35(1), where it is said that Indigenous people or Aboriginal peoples have a right the Canadian Constitution affirms Aboriginal and treaty rights. And what that means is that those things that, like Indigenous knowledge, are part of our Aboriginal knowledge framework, and that those are then protected by the Constitution of Canada. And as Indigenous peoples are the guardians and interpreters of the culture and knowledge system, past, present, and future, Indigenous people have the right and obligation to exercise control to protect their cultural, intellectual properties and knowledge. And this is something that, after we did this study in 1993, in 1999, we took this information to the Grand Council of the Mi'kmaq Nation. And with that, as a result of the work that had been done on this, we said to our tribal leaders and elders, this is a right you have, you must use it and protect it. You cannot wait for somebody to give you money to say it's okay, or you must assert your independence and self-determination on this. And this says much the same on terms of the protection issue. And it was as a result of that our nation developed what is called the Mi'kmaq Ethics Watch. Now, the Mi'kmaq Ethics Watch is a special group that came from, let me see if I have this on here. No, I got it back. I'm skipping ahead myself. Let me take you up to the Mi'kmaq Ethics Watch in just a minute. Let me also check my time. Okay, I'm still good. So anyway, the sites of transformation, as I was saying, are then those things that have been going on in the world and in the national level and regionally in terms of making changes around the ethical issues. There have been many communities of late that have been working toward what is called decolonizing methodologies. And this morning, as I was in a session, and a gentleman asked, what are decolonization? And so when we look at what are decolonizing methodologies, one of our key leaders in that particular area has been Linda Smith, a Maori woman who has put together the book Decolonizing Methodologies, Indigenous Peoples and Research. And so from her work and others, and certainly these have been sort of my heroes in terms of the work that's going on in the field, there have been certainly many others that have been doing this beginning part of it. And what decolonizing methodology begins with is developing an awareness and a critique of the Eurocentric colonial bias and its values and its effect on everyone, sort of what has been called Paulo Freire conscientization. When we come to this awareness of what has happened to us, some of us can get down angry and mad, or we can begin to do something about it. So there's many places that people are at, in terms of their activism. Some people are doing things, but they haven't heard about the full impact of what has happened to their people. And so, as Graham Smith says, it isn't a linear process, but is a process of circularity in which people enter into it at different places. But an awareness of that, and I think that for me as a student growing up, I think once I came to become aware of what had happened to Indigenous people, in particular my own people, and why I was the way I was, why I was shy, yes, and why I felt what I was feeling about myself at the time, all came as part of the history that I had lived and the kind of colonization and white privilege and racism that had been part of my life. And the second part of what we need to do in terms of decolonization is about developing educational systems